We're going to continue our study of Proverbs tonight. If you want to turn your Bibles to the 10th chapter of Proverbs, that's where we'll pick up. As you're turning there, let me ask you a question. If every time in the last year you said something positive to or about someone, you received $10, while at the same time, every time you said something negative to or about someone, you lost $5, would you be rich today or poor? I think that just kind of, as we talk about the common sense wisdom of Proverbs and what last week where we saw that God says it's smart to be smart and it's dumb to be dumb. That's going to be there's a kind of a change, a shift in Solomon's approach to the Proverbs where in the previous ones there were almost kind of like stories that he would tell about there was the scarlet woman, and then there was the personification of wisdom, and there was an ongoing context to several verses at a time. And for the next probably 12, 13 chapters, we're going to be looking at just these one line or one verse snippets of couplets. Most of the ones that we're going to be looking at tonight are going to be dealing with, a lot of them anyway, are going to be dealing with the subject of our lips. The things that we say. And I understand years ago when the teachers used to teach the kids on the playgrounds that sticks and stones may break your bones, but words will never hurt you. And I understand they were just wanting little Johnny not to grow up and be a pansy. But they were wrong. And I think when we look at the man's arsenals and how great and vast they are, the weaponry that we developed over the years, the arrows that come from our mouth are among the most lethal. And tonight we're going to be looking at a lot of Proverbs of contrast. There'll be the first line, and then it'll be the antithetical contrast in the second line. We'll see a lot of wise contrasted with the foolish. Or interestingly enough, the delightful, actually I think that's supposed to be diligent, contrasted with the slothful, and then also the righteousness compared to evil. And it's important to notice these contrasts when we come up to them, because by seeing the antithesis of each statement, we can understand the other. The Proverbs of Solomon, a wise son makes a glad father, but a foolish man is the grief of his mother. You know, when the son hits the three-pointer or hits the home run or something like that, the dad's standing up and elbowing, high-fiving everybody around him, saying, "That's my boy." But then when he messes up, he says, "Did you see what your son just did?" You know, he gets that from your side of the family. And we kind of, a wise son makes a father glad, but then a foolish son messes up the mom. And I think what Solomon is doing when he includes both the father and the mother, he's not singling out that the father gets glad and the mother gets grieved, but he's saying it's kind of raising a child as a package deal. And an obedient son, an obedient daughter can bring much joy, can bring much gladness to a home, but when they're not obedient, it can bring a lot of grief. Treasures of wickedness profit nothing, but righteousness delivers from death. The Lord will not allow the righteous soul to famish, but he casts away the desire of the wicked. You know, a lot of remember as we're going through the Proverbs, in fact, this is true of all of the wisdom literature, there'll be statements like this that are made that we could easily interpret as a promise of God. And that's kind of been misleading to a lot of people. The wisdom literature brings forth very strong principles, but not necessarily to interpret it to be promises. It may be something that if something is done a certain way, then most likely something will be the result of it, is kind of the approach. He who has a slack hand becomes poor, but the hand of the diligent becomes rich. He who gathers in summer is a wise son, and he who sleeps in harvest is the son who causes shame. You know, it's just there's a time when you got to get up and go get the job done, because it's the clock is ticking. You know, you can't just wait until it feels good. You got to do it when it has to be done. Blessings are on the head of the righteous, but violence covers the mouth of the wicked. The memory of the righteous is blessed, but the name of the wicked will rot. That's a pretty descriptive thing, isn't it? People will like to remember a righteous person. They will memorialize them. They will have oftentimes celebrations remembering the works that they had done. But when evil men and women die, they just as soon forget their memory altogether. The wise in heart will receive commands, but a prating fool will fall. New King James uses the word prating a few times, coming from the Old King James as well. I like the way the New Living Translation carries the second part of this line. He says that, but babbling fools will fall flat on their faces. You know, it's not that he's not saying that if a person is wise, that he's going to be like a lemming. You know what lemmings are? They just follow the lemmings ahead of them until they run off the side of the cliff. And he's not saying wise are going to just blindly follow whoever leads them, but they're going to be willing to be led. It's the person that's not willing to be led, that sees himself as being independent and standing on their own 2 feet and the captain of their own destiny. These are the ones that will fall flat on their face. Verse 9 says, he who walks with integrity walks securely, but he who perverts his ways will become known. You know, it may look like the bad guys are getting away with it, and it may look like that the good guys never get the due that should be theirs, but it won't always be that way. And the perverted ways will become known. He who winks with the eye causes trouble, but a prating fool, and the word prating just means babbling, as the NLT renders it. But a prating fool will fall. I'm not sure what the winking with the eye is talking about. It could be something similar to like when people cheat at cards, you know, and they have their little signals that they give to somebody. It may be something like a bad guy has the signal like now's the time to go rob these people or something like that. Or it could be just the way that somebody just has sort of a flippant attitude toward evil. They just kind of wink at evil when it comes along. I think that's maybe more likely the idea. The mouth of the righteous is a well of life, but violence covers the mouth of the wicked. Hatred stirs up strife, but love covers all sins. You know, love, I think what he's saying here, love tends to minimize rather than exaggerate the sins of others. Yeah, you know, it seems like some people like to just capitalize on other people's failures. I don't know if that makes their failures seem less significant, if they can make somebody else seem worse than they do. But what love does is it doesn't ignore, it doesn't turn a blind eye toward evil and impropriety, but it will seek to minimize the sins in other people, whereas hatred stirs up the strife. And there's a reciprocity that goes on here. Hatred stirs up strife, which stirs up more hatred, which stirs up more strife. But when a person loves selflessly, as we were talking earlier, that will tend to breed selflessness in others. Wisdom is found on the lips of him who has understanding, but a rod is for the back of him who is devoid of understanding. You know, just somebody's lacking understanding, they just need to have some sense knocked into them sometimes. Wise people store up knowledge, but the mouth of the foolish is near destruction. The rich man's wealth is a strong city, and the destruction of the poor is their poverty. The labor of the righteous leads to life, but the wages of the wicked to sin. He who keeps instruction is the way of life, or is in the way of life, but he who refuses correction goes astray. Whoever hides hatred has lying lips, and whoever spreads slander is a fool. You know, if you think about it, if you look at a butcher and a surgeon, they both kind of do the same thing. They take a sharp knife and cut up meat. But there's tremendous differences between them. One is because of the goal of each one, they have different techniques. They approach what they're doing quite a bit differently, even though you could say they're doing the same thing. And I think sometimes there's a big difference between a brother or a sister going to another brother or sister with concern and wanting to share with them words of correction, or some, you know, as Galatians says, if you're overtaken in fault, you who are spiritual, restore somebody who has fallen in such a way. And those same words They might be identical words in the lips of somebody else that's using them as a gossip, using them in order to bear tales. And they may be saying the same thing, but the goals are different, the intentions are different, and the application of them is different. And, it's whoever hides hatred has lying lips, and whoever spreads slander is a fool. I think if we would stop and analyze it, if we would just really kind of look at our own lives and the way that we view, just think of somebody that you've got negative views about, somebody that you have some sort of negative feelings toward. I bet if we really analyze it adequately, correctly, honestly, most of those views come from what we've heard others say. Somebody says something negative about somebody else, and then we kind of log that back in our data bank, and then we have some encounter with the person that's maybe less than positive, and that we could put into the negative side of the equation, and we take what the other person has said to us about that person and add to what we've experienced, and then we multiply it, and it becomes bigger in our own minds. And I think that's kind of what Solomon's talking about. In the multitude of words, sin is not lacking, but he who restrains his lips is wise. We've all heard it said that it's better to keep silent and have people think you're a fool than to speak and remove all doubt. Or like another very smart man said one time, nothing is often a good thing to do and always a good thing to say. Sometimes we feel like we have to fill the empty space. We have to say something, and it's in that multitude of words that we can oftentimes mess up. The tongue of the righteous, verse 20, is choice silver, and the heart of the wicked is worth little. The lips of the righteous feed many, but fools die for lack of wisdom. Notice the contrast. You got the righteous on one side, and then the antithesis is fools. It's not wise and fools. It's not righteous and evil, but it's righteous and foolish. We probably most of us are familiar with how people of the word of faith persuasion have taken a lot of the things that the Proverbs and other verses in the Bible have to say about our words, the words things we say with our lips, and they twist them into a thing that I believe is even aberrant and even heretical. But there is a truthful element to the fact that when we say things, there's a power in our words. It's not some sort of metaphysical force that's being released, but we say positive, encouraging, uplifting things, then we will get positive and encouraging and uplifting results. If we say foolish things, then we'll get the opposite results. The blessing of the Lord makes one rich, and he adds no sorrow with it. When the Lord blesses, we oftentimes, in our prayers, we'll say, bless me, Lord. Say, Lord, I got this busy day today, and I just ask your blessing on it, or I'm facing this thing, or whatever it is, and we ask the Lord to bless whatever our plans or endeavors might be. And usually when we say that, when we ask the Lord to bless something that we're about to do or something that we're about to undergo, what we mean is, God, put your hand on this so that everything works out right. Put all the pieces together so that at the end of the day, at the end of this encounter, when all is said and done, I'm going to be happy. That's what we mean when we ask the Lord to bless it. And that's not a bad prayer to ask. Obviously, it's I like being happy, and I like the pieces to fit together at the end of the day and all of that. But I think when we ask the Lord to bless something, we should have better in mind not what we want, but nevertheless, His will be done. And, when the Lord blesses things in His way, on His terms, and in His timing, there's always no result or no regret. There's always a sense of satisfaction and a sense of that it was done right if we just simply give the situation to Him and then ask Him to bless it in His own terms, in His way. The Living Bible, the old Living Ken Taylor paraphrase says, the Lord's blessing is our greatest wealth, and our work adds nothing to it. If we just give it over to God, then there's nothing more we have to do. To do evil, verse 23, is like sport to a fool, but a man of understanding has wisdom. you've probably known people like this. There are some people that like to do bad stuff. They like to do evil. It's a sport to them. It's a game. They like to do it just to see if they can get away with it. You've known people like that. I mean, it's just this whole thing, this whole life is just seeing how they can turn the angle just to see if they can. It's how they roll. It's their jam. They just want to see what they can do. It's like a sport to a fool. But a man of understanding has wisdom. The fear of the wicked will come upon him, and the desire of the righteous will be granted. And when the whirlwind passes by, the wicked is no more, but the righteous has an everlasting foundation. We don't know when, we don't know in what manner. We just know that in the end, that's going to be the case. Once the whirlwind passes by, all these gamers, all these guys that are just playing the angle, just seeing what they can get away with, they won't get away with it no more. As vinegar to the teeth. I don't know that I've ever done that before. But as vinegar to the teeth and smoke to the eyes. I have done that one. I do know what that's like. As vinegar to the teeth and smoke to the eyes, so is the lazy man to those who send him. If somebody sends a lazy man on an errand, they just know before they ever depart that it's going to be half done if done at all, and it's going to be something that they're going to regret. And if vinegar on the teeth is anything like smoke in the eyes, that's not a good thing. The fear of the Lord prolongs days, but the years of the wicked will be shortened. The hope of the righteous will be gladness, but the expectation of the wicked will perish. The way of the Lord is strength for the upright, but destruction will come to the workers of iniquity. The righteous will never be removed, but the wicked will not inhabit the earth. Sure seems like it's going the other way around, though, doesn't it? I mean, oftentimes it seems like the wicked are going to prevail. The wicked are going to win. But we know that they won't. The mouth of the righteous brings forth wisdom, but the perverse tongue will be cut out. The lips of the righteous know what is acceptable, but the mouth of the wicked, what is perverse. Chapter 11, verse 1. Dishonest scales are an abomination to the Lord, but a just weight is his delight. We don't really do business that way today in our society. It's all digital, and we make electronic transfers, and we, just use a debit card on Amazon, and we don't understand this way of transacting business. But for many, many years, the world's way of doing it was a barter type of system. And if you were going to buy something for somebody, you gave something to them of equal value or greater value, however the case may be. And that's how, it may be gold, it may be silver that you would put, but it was all done by way of balance scales. And it was just kind of a thing that businessmen seemed to have one set of scales that they bought stuff with, and another set of scales that they sold things with. Like there's a story of medieval England many years ago where this farmer had taken this baker to court saying that he had shortchanged him. He was filing charges against him, saying that he was always shorting him on the bread that he bought. And he says, like, every week I'd go and buy my bread from him, and the loaves would get smaller and smaller, but he would always charge me the same amount. And so the judge asked the baker, well, what do you say about that? And he goes, Lord, Your Honor, I don't know. I mean, I go to him every week, and I don't have I've never had a set of scales. I don't know how to weigh it out, but I buy a pound of butter from him, and then I use that pound of butter to measure out the bread that I sell him. And so he was giving him smaller and smaller chunks of butter, calling it a pound, and so he was getting in return smaller and smaller loaves of bread. As a pastor, as somebody in full-time ministry, oftentimes people would look at what I do as this is my job. My occupation is the ministry. My occupation is the job. And I understand that. I mean, I get a paycheck, and it's how we pay the bills. and so forth. So I understand that side of the reasoning. But the problem with it is not so much that it would turn what I do into a job, but I think that also, and this is equally errant, that it would make like what there's a division between secular labor and what we would call sacred labor. And there's the idea that, I go to work in a sacred environment, and you guys go to work in a secular environment. And the truth is, sometimes you've seen a lot of churches have the signs over their exits that say you are now entering the mission field. Or I've seen them in parking lots as you're driving out of the parking lot. You're now entering the mission field. And I think the same sort of mindset ought to be brought to all of us whenever we go to work. There should be a sign whenever on our dashboard, whenever we put the key in the ignition to drive off to work, there should be a sign on the dashboard that says you are now going to church. Because that's really what we do on Monday through Friday is much more going to church than what we do on Sunday mornings or Wednesday nights. And the dishonest scales, this way of doing business, the way the economy rolled back in the Bible days, if we would think of the same application of that today, what Solomon is saying, when these guys are weighing out their stuff and they got their balance scales and they put the weight on one side and then put the goods on the other side, that's as much going to church. That's an abomination to God when we do things that are unrighteous in the workplace. But a just weight is his delight. The guy that uses the just weight, that's a guy that's just gone to church. That's a guy that knows how to have church. And I think that's a way we should all look at it. When pride comes, then comes shame. Well, with the humble is wisdom. Now, this idea of pride and proud and those words it's a theme that occurs 14 times in the book of Proverbs. Definitely one of the major things about how God hates the proud look, as we saw in Proverbs 6. The integrity of the upright will guide them, but the perversity of the unfaithful will destroy them. Riches do not profit in the day of wrath, but righteousness delivers from death. The righteousness of the blameless will direct his way aright, but the wicked will fall by his own wickedness. The righteousness of the upright will devour them, but the unfaithful will be caught by their lust. That's my New King James has the word lust. The New American Standard uses the word greed. That's kind of a synonym for lust, I think. The NIV has the word evil desires. That's pretty descriptive. But as I oftentimes say, it's hard to beat the old King James, and it uses the word naughtiness here. The unfaithful will be caught in their own naughtiness. And when a wicked man dies, his expectation will perish, and the hope of the unjust perishes. The righteous is delivered from trouble, and it comes to the wicked instead. The hypocrite with his mouth destroys his neighbor, but through knowledge the righteous will be delivered. That's a pretty interesting antithetical proverb, isn't it? The first part of it says the hypocrite with his mouth, the things that we say, that will destroy our neighbor. But, so the flip side of that, the other side of the coin, the antithesis of that is, through knowledge, the righteous will be delivered. If only we sought knowledge more than we did gossip, more than the things that we say or the things that we hear. There was a show several years ago, I think it was 2020 or 60 Minutes, one of those shows. And they were actually doing a thing on like the supermarket scandal magazines, the National Enquirer and that sort of thing. And they were had the reporter man on the street or the man in the checkout line kind of a deal. And as people were picking up the National Enquirer, he would interview them and ask them, do you believe that this woman gave birth to a three-headed alien, and they would say, no, I don't believe that, and Elvis is alive and well in somebody's basement, Escondido, and all that sort of stuff. And they said, do you believe that sort of thing that they write in? He said, no, I don't believe any of it. And he said, well, then why do you buy the magazine? What's the motivation for buying it? He said, I just like the juicy stories. And customer after customer gave that same report. And there is something about the salacious. There is something about that over-the-top stuff that just draws us. And if only we were drawn to a desire of knowledge, a hunger for knowledge, more than we were about that titillating kind of gossip, what a better world this would be. When it goes well with the righteous, verse 10, the city rejoices. And when the wicked perish, there's jubilation. By blessing of the upright, the city is exalted, but it is overthrown by the mouth of the wicked. A man of understanding holds his peace. But a man of understanding holds his peace. A talebearer reveals secrets, but he who is of a faithful spirit conceals a matter. Sometimes, just because we are told something, it doesn't mean that we automatically have to say something. You know, just because somebody shares something with us, it doesn't mean that we need to share it with somebody else. Just because an idea comes into our head doesn't mean that it's got to be said. Just because we think it doesn't mean we got to say it. There was an anonymous source. I read one place where it ascribed it to Eleanor Roosevelt, but it actually predates her by at least a generation. But it says, great minds discuss ideas, average minds discuss events, and small minds discuss people. And I think that's a pretty good commentary on what Solomon is saying here. Where there is no counsel, verse 14, the people fall. But in the multitude of counselors, there is safety. I think there's a couple of things that we can take from this, a couple of very good points, some good takeaways. In the multitude of counselors, there is safety. You know, we need each other. We need each other's encouragement. We need each other's counsel. We need each other's advice. And the reverse is true. You know, we're not in this. No man is an island, and we're not in this alone. We need to help one another and depend upon one another. I think that's a good point that comes from this. But then there also is where it says there's in the multitude of counselors. You know, there are those that Chuck Smith used to call them counsel shoppers. You know, there are those people that they've got something that they want to see done. They're thinking about doing X. And so the person goes to the first person to ask for their counsel. And they said, well, you know, I knew a person that did that once and this happened and it wasn't very good and probably would advise you not to do it. And so then the person goes to the second person and asks them for their advice. And they say, well, you know, I did that one time and it really backfired on me and it's probably not a very good idea. And they go to 3 or 4 people and they all get the same similar counsel. And then they finally go to the 6th person and they say, well, you know, if the Lord's put that on your heart, you should go with it. And then the person immediately says, you know, there's safety and knowledge in the multitude of counselors, and I've sought a multitude of counselors, and this is what God has told me to do with that. And we just seek around until we find the kind of advice or the counsel that we're looking for. That's not what Solomon is saying. And sometimes, and I've seen this often with marriage problems, where people they're having marriage problems, they'll go to people in the church, and they'll, really what they want to do is just kind of like dump about their spouse. And they'll keep going from person, and, somebody will say, well, you know, what the Bible says for what your role as the wife, or what the Bible says what your role as the husband is that you should do this. And that's not what the person wants to hear. And so then they go to another counsel, and then they go to another counsel. I had a friend many, many years ago that was getting in trouble because he was spending a lot of time at work sharing the gospel. And his supervisor had told him to stop doing that. And he was very upset over that because everybody else could talk about going to the lake on the weekend or going out and getting drunk. And they would talk about all those things, but if he just talked about the Lord, then that wasn't acceptable. And he thought he was defending it by the fact that if the worldly people could do it, then why couldn't he do it? And he was coming to a lot of people in the church, asking them what their advice were. And every one of them was telling him, it's not being a very good witness, and you're there to work, and if the supervisor tells you shouldn't do it, then you shouldn't do it. And just because the worldly people do it doesn't make it all right with you. And at the end of the day, he said that he was being not only persecuted at work, but now he was being persecuted at church for his faith. So there is safety, there is wisdom, there is some goodness to the multitude of counselors, but I think we should seek godly counsel. and we should do so that we can improve our lot, not necessarily change people or our opinion. He who is a surety for a stranger will suffer. We talked about this last week in chapter 6, where it says that if you become a surety, which means if you co-sign, if you guarantee somebody a loan, you be careful because you might end up having to pay for it. That's the Bible word surety. And he says, he who is a surety for a stranger will suffer. And stranger in the Bible means foreigner, Gentile, somebody from outside of Israel. He who is a surety for a stranger will suffer, but he who hates surety is secure. And again, Old King James, just can't beat it. He that is a surety for a stranger shall smart for it, but he that hateth suretyship is sure. So underline that one and say it 10 times real fast. He that is a surety for a stranger shall smart for it, but he that hateth suretyship is sure. A gracious woman retains honor, but a ruthless men retain riches. Well, ruthless men retain riches as well, but because that's not all they retain is riches. The merciful man does good for his own soul, but he who is cruel troubles his own flesh. A wicked man does deceptive work, but he who sows righteousness will have a sure reward. As righteousness leads to life, so he who pursues evil pursues it to his own death. Those who are of a perverse heart are an abomination to the Lord, but the blameless in their ways are his delight. And though they join forces, the wicked will not go unpunished, but the posterity of the righteous will be delivered. It reminds me of Revelation chapter 20, whenever I read this verse, where after Satan has been bound in the bottomless pit for 1,000 years, and man has lived in a pure utopia for an entire millennium. There's been no evil, no sickness, no disease. It's been the perfect environment, and no temptation. There's no tempter. And at the end of the 1,000 years, Satan is released, and he goes upon mankind that's been living for this 1,000-year perfect society, and he goes up to them and he says, you know what? If we just join forces, if we just all band together, we can overthrow the yoke of bondage that the Lord has put upon us, of making us do things his way. And the Bible doesn't indicate how much of mankind follows him, but a good significant number does. And just the idea, the thought process is, well, if we just hold hands, if we just join forces, if we just become this big axis together, we can overthrow the creator of the universe. It's kind of funny. And that's what he's saying. Though they join forces, the wicked won't go unpunished because God's going to take care of them. As a ring of gold in a swine's snout, so is a lovely woman who lacks discretion. As a ring of gold in a swine's snout. Now understand, this is Solomon, a Hebrew, writing to Hebrews, writing to a son who was a Hebrew. And the swines, the pigs, were considered to be unclean animals. And they would put rings in the noses of the pigs, the Gentiles did, in order to lead them around. That's how they tethered them, keep them from running off. So when he talks about a ring in a snout's nose, it's not talking about an ornament of jewelry. The nose rings back in those days were popular as well. And it was considered to be something that would be, it was an ornament of beauty. And beautiful women would wear a nose ring, and that was considered to be very attractive. But you would never think of putting a gold ring inside a pig's nose. It's just kind of like, as a ring of gold is in a pig's snout, as a ring of gold is in a pig's nose, it's just like having a lovely woman who lacks discretion. If you think about it, either way, whether we're talking about a gold ring in a pig's nose or a beautiful woman who's lacking discretion, either way, it's a pretty good waste of beauty. It's a waste of a gold ring or a waste of a beautiful woman, one or the other. The desire of the righteous is only good, but the expectation of the wicked is wrath. There's one who scatters yet increases more, and there's one who withholds more than is right, but it leads to poverty. The generous soul will be made rich, And the man and he who waters will also be watered himself. You know, as twisted as the whole give so you can get doctrine is, and believe me, I'm not by any stretch going that direction. You know, it's just you see the guys on TV that kind of promote that. The reason why you're poor is because you're not giving, and so if you give, then God will give it to you, pressed down, running over, and shaken together, and open up the windows of heaven so that you can't contain it. So write your check out to me right now, and then God will give you the 100-fold return. Ain't even going there, okay? But, and as it is with almost every heresy, there's some sort of origin, some sort of root of truth in it. And the truth is, you can't outgive God. You know, I mean, if we are serving the Lord and being faithful in our stewardship toward Him, as He says here, the generous soul will be made rich. And it's not just simply getting that 100-fold return of the big check in the mail afterwards. If you talk to somebody that has the gift of giving, somebody that has that generous heart, and that's the last thing they think of. And yet they're so rich. Their life is so full. And the truth is that if you cast your bread upon the waters, after many days it will return to you. The people will curse him who withholds grain, but blessing will be on the head of him who sells it. You know, this would be when you try to control the economy through monopoly. You know, we've seen several periods of human history where that would be done. And sometimes the king would try to do that by getting a corner on the market, and then that way he could sell whatever, you know, because everything was considered to be his anyway, and he could sell stuff at exorbitant prices. And so he would withhold the grain in order to drive the grain market up. And he says people will curse that person, but then the blessing will be on the head of him who sells it. Somebody who's generous. He who earnestly seeks good and finds favor, but trouble will come to him who seeks evil. Or he who earnestly seeks good will find favor, but trouble comes to him who seeks evil. He who trusts in his riches will fall, but the righteous will flourish like foliage. He who troubles his own house will inherit the wind, and the fool will be servant to the wise of heart. The fruit of a righteous is a tree of life, and he who wins souls is wise. Now, I'm all about evangelism. I'm all about street witnessing. I think that we should go and share our testimonies, and we should try to lead people to the Lord. We should try to win souls. But that's not what this is talking about. You know, they didn't do street evangelism back in those days. This isn't talking about winning somebody to Hebraism. It's somebody that's trying to win a soul to righteousness. You know, you see somebody going the wrong direction, you're trying to turn them in the right direction. If the righteous will be recompensed on the earth, how much more the ungodly and the sinner? Whoever loves instruction, verse 1 of chapter 12, loves knowledge, but he who hates correction is stupid. He who hates correction is stupid. That's words in the Bible. And that's even anonymous notes in the agape box. You know, and not that I've ever gotten one before, but if I was to get an anonymous note in the agape box that just somebody was telling me that I ain't got it going on, and yet they didn't have the integrity to sign it, I still need to take heed to what they say. I can't just simply throw it away because they didn't have the courage to identify themselves. Because what if what they say is true? Where he says, he who hates correction is stupid. And all the English versions, modern English translations, use that word. I looked at every one I could find. They all use the word stupid. And I know a lot of you parents don't like to use it, but it's a Bible word. And the Old King James uses the word brutish. And the word carries the idea of having the intelligence of a cow, you know, a brute beast. A good man obtains favor from the Lord, but a man of wicked intentions he will condemn. A man is not established by wickedness, but the root of the righteous cannot be moved. An excellent wife is the crown of her husband. And what don't you wish that there wasn't going to be a second half to this. We're in this section of Proverbs where there's all these antithetical statements, and there's the first part, and then the second part says, but. And I know you guys are all reading ahead, so I know you're all doing that. But don't you wish it said and, or don't you wish it was said so is, instead of saying but? An excellent wife is the crown of her husband, but she who causes shame is like rottenness in his bones. In Judges chapter 6, the angel of the Lord appears to Gideon. He's threshing wheat down inside a wine press to hide out from the Midianites. And the angel appeared to him in verse 12 of Judges 6 and says, "The Lord is with you, you mighty man of valor." And it's when the Lord raised up Gideon. That's when he did the thing with the fleeces and make sure it was the Lord. And then his 300 men destroyed the entire Midianite army. And the word mighty man of valor, the word valor here is the word chayil in the Hebrew language. It's the same word that's used in Hebrew in Proverbs here, where it says an excellent wife, chayil. It's a feminine form of it, but when we get to Proverbs 31, it talks about the virtuous woman. Same word. NIV, if you're using the New International Version, it's a woman of noble character. A woman of noble character is a crown to our husband's head. And we could say the reverse. A virtuous man, a man of valor, is a crown to his wife. But the opposite is also true. The thoughts of the righteous are right, but the counsels of the wicked are deceitful. The words of the wicked are, lie in wait for blood, but the mouth of the upright will deliver them. The wicked are overthrown and are no more, but the house of the righteous will stand. A man will be commended according to his wisdom. Okay, that's a good commonsensical statement. A man will be commended according to his wisdom, but he who is of a perverse heart will be despised. Better is the one who is slighted but has a servant than he who honors himself but lacks bread. Little difficult verse to translate. The Old Living Bible, the Ken Taylor paraphrase again, says it this way: it's better to get your hands dirty and to eat than to be too proud to work and starve. That's probably a pretty, not literal translation, but I think it's a good, accurate interpretation. A righteous man regards the life of his animal, but the tender mercies of the wicked are cruel. Another interesting contrast between this couplet. Literally, where it says the righteous man knows or regards the life of his animal, literally is the righteous man knows the soul of his beast, which is kind of a cool way of stating it, isn't it? And it's not talking about Fido or Fluffy or Fifi. It's not talking about that kind of an animal, which I suppose it would fit. But he's talking about a wise man knows. In those days, animals were beasts of burden. They were work animals. They were oxen, and they would be used for they were goats and sheep and so forth. And they didn't have pets in that same sense like we do today. But a righteous man knows what his animal needs and then gives it to him, provides for him. A righteous man is somebody that understands that God placed man here on earth to have dominion over it, but that doesn't mean to rape and pillage it. It doesn't mean that everything is subservient to him. He's to use it all for God's glory. And a righteous man knows the soul of his beast and gives what is necessary for the animal. But the tender mercies of the very best that a wicked man can do is still cruel. He who tills his land will be satisfied with bread, but he who follows frivolity is devoid of understanding. The NIV does it this way: he who works for his land will have abundant food, but he who chases fantasies lacks judgment. Or the Ken Taylor version, once again: a hard-working farmer has plenty to eat, but it's stupid to waste time on useless projects. The wicked covet the catch of evil men, but the root of the righteous yields fruit. The wicked is ensnared by the transgression of his lips, but the righteous will come through trouble. A man will be satisfied with good by the fruit of his mouth, and the recompense of a man's hands will be rendered to him. The way of a fool is right in his own eyes, but he who heeds counsel is wise. A fool's wrath is known at once, but a prudent man covers shame. What this is saying is that a wise man, a prudent man, kind of knows how to let it go. You know, sometimes, I mean, bad things happen, and sometimes, you know, Jesus said that if you find out that somebody had something against you, you go to them, and if you find out that you've done something against somebody, you should go to them. And I am a big advocate of that. I believe that. But I also think the Bible teaches what I would call the 11th commandment, get thee over it. And sometimes there's a place for somebody to just realize, I'm just going to let this go. You know, it's not that big a deal. It's not that important. A prudent man knows how to do that. Where a fool's wrath is instantly known. You know, they fly off the handle and everybody knows, well, there's a fool making himself known again. He who speaks truth declares righteousness, but a false witness deceit. And there is one who speaks like the piercings of a sword, but the tongue of the wise promotes health. Here's a picture of Jackie Robinson and Pee Wee Reese. They both played for the Dodgers back in the late 40s and early 50s. And in his first season, Jackie Robinson was the first African American to come into the major leagues, to make it to the bigs. And it was quite a sensational thing. I mean, there was a lot of, he underwent, this one reporter called him the loneliest man in sports because even his own teammates had tried to get together a petition to get him fired off the team because they just didn't want to have a black man on the team with them. And because Pee Wee Reese refused to sign the petition, they ended up scrapping it. But there's a very well-known story. If you've ever seen the movie 40-42, it depicts it pretty well. And there's a well-known story when they had their first away game in the opening season. They started the first road trip, and they were playing the Cincinnati Reds in Cincinnati, Ohio. Well, Pee Wee Reese was from Kentucky, right across the river. And he was kind of considered, the Reds saw him as their hometown favorite. And during, there was a time when Jackie had made an error and everybody was booing him, and so much that it even stopped the game. And so Pee Wee Reese came over to him, and here's the clip from the movie.
The corn stalks were held out. We just ran out of ammunition.
Better luck next time, Pee Wee.
Ain't gonna be it next time, Jack. All we got's right here. Thank you, Jack.
What are you thanking me for?
I got family out there from Louisville. I need them to know. I need them to know who I am.
Hey, number one! You playing ball or socializing?
Playing ball, up.
Come on! Don't run and get Junior!
Playing ball. Maybe tomorrow we'll all wear 42. That way they won't tell us apart.
That was the hug that changed professional sports forever. And Jackie Robinson later said that hug saved his career. He was that close to cashing it in. You know, there's one who he had been receiving these words that were piercing like a sword, but it was that one word and act of encouragement from Pee Wee Reese made all the difference. The tongue of the wise promotes health. The truthful lip shall be established forever, but the lying tongue is but for a moment. Deceit is in the heart of those who devise evil, but counselors have peace have joy. No grave trouble will overtake the righteous, but the wicked will be filled with evil. No grave trouble will overtake the righteous. Ultimately, yeah, that's true. Lying lips are an abomination to the Lord, but those who deal truthfully are his delight. Them lips, you know, boy, we'd be all right if it wasn't for them lips. Prudent man conceals knowledge, but the heart of fools proclaims foolishness. The hand of the diligent will rule, but the lazy man will be forced to labor. Anxiety in the heart of a man causes depression. If you got the old King James, it says, heaviness is in the heart of man maketh it stoop. And that's actually pretty literal. It's the idea that when we have heaviness in our heart, the heart hangs down. It stoops. It drags. It's from a Hebrew word that means to press down. But a good word makes it glad. The righteous should choose his friends carefully, for the way of the wicked leads them astray. A lazy man does not roast what he took in hunting. He went out and killed himself a deer, but he was too lazy to dress it and cook it, and just such bother, and so he didn't eat. But diligence is the man's precious possession. And the way of righteousness is life. In its pathway, there is no death. I think one of the things that we see from the principles of these 3 chapters that we've looked at tonight, with these promises about how it's going to be for the righteous and how it's going to be for the unrighteous, how it's going to be for the wise and how it's going to be for the foolish. And, the Bible says, David proclaimed that we are fearfully and wonderfully made. And the day is coming when we will be remade. The day is coming when all this that we are surrounded with, all of the evil and all of the foolishness and all of the junk of this life, the day is coming when that will all be no more. And when we are remade, this time it won't be of clay. Right now it's ashes to ashes and dust to dust. But when God takes the same elements that are in our body now, but recreates them into a glorified status, this new one won't be made out of clay. Let's pray. God, we do thank you, Lord, for your faithfulness, for your love for us. We thank you for the promises that you have in store for us of the future and even for the present. God, you delight in uprightness. You take pleasure in the man who is honest and who thinks not of himself and tries to not only lift up his brother man, but even cares for the brute beasts. Those are pleasing and delightful to you, and it's a choice, a life that is blessed by you. And so we want that way of righteousness, Lord. We want that way that is a path that has been paved by your Son Jesus as he has gone before us, that we want to walk in that same way. In Jesus' name, amen.